Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new here, we do this every single week, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. And I normally do like to start these by going over some news and announcements, but I don't really have anything to cover this time around. But I do like to give a quick shout out to Alex over at Boardgame Co, because him and I do work together keeping track of all these campaigns so that I can put these videos together for you each and every week. But then Alex puts out a video at the start of each month, going over the entire month and letting you know of the heavy hitters that you can expect. He also has a ton of other content as well, often putting out multiple videos in a day, going over reviews and playthroughs, and all sorts of commentary on the industry. So if you are interested in even more board gaming content, you'll definitely want to check him out because he does a fantastic job, and you can find a link to his channel in the description down below. I do also like to give a quick mention to Zilla Blitz because he focuses exclusively on the historical war games. These are a whole subgenre of their own that I do not cover in near as much detail, so if you do want to know about all of those as well, you'll definitely want to check out his channel, which I will have linked in the description as well. But that's all I got for an intro, and although we do have quite a few games to cover, I think we can probably get through this one fairly quickly because most of these games aren't so complicated that I'll have to spend a whole lot of time on them. And if you're in Canada, that might be a good thing, so you can spend more of your time enjoying your Victoria Day long weekend. And as I'm filming this, the Leafs are set to play the Panthers in about an hour, so hopefully we get some news there. We do have a little bit of a hole to climb out of, but I'm going to choose to distract myself until then, so let's check out the campaigns. And we are starting off with an awesome campaign here, and this one's launching on May 19th, and it's called Robo Rescue Origins. And this one's a card drafting game where players are going to be using those cards to try and build the most impressive robot. But one of the reasons that this campaign is so awesome is that you can get this game completely for free. The campaign will be offering 4 different boxes that you can purchase, but the first one will be for free, and then the others are only $1 if you do want to add them to your pledge, which I do recommend because this is a really nice gesture from them. The way the game works is that each player is going to have their own display of cards that they're going to be managing and manipulating in order to try and score the most victory points at the end of the game. Each player is going to have these 2 cards in the middle here, and these represent your workshop. And then you'll be able to add cards to any of the stacks on the 4 sides of those 2 cards. Each of those 4 stacks do score individually, but you're only going to be scoring your best 2 at the end of the game. And if you ever do have to place a card and you have no valid placement, you will have to wipe out one of those 4 areas completely in order to start it fresh with that new card. Players are going to be taking turns drafting 2 cards on a turn, and you're going to be drawing from either the shared deck or the shared display where you're going to have a few cards face up. Each of the cards come in different colors and have different icons on them, and in order to place a card into the bottom section of your lab, you have to make sure that none of the cards in a stack have the same icons on them. This means that they all have to be unique, and you're going to be gaining victory points based on the number of different icons you're able to get in that stack. This image here also has the cards in stacks of the same color. I don't believe that's a requirement in order to place a card there, but I think it does help you get more victory points. But in order to place cards into your top stack, it is a requirement that all those cards are different colors, and also each of the cards do need to share at least one icon with the cards before them. As I mentioned, if you do pick up a card and it doesn't meet the requirements to be put in any of your existing stacks of cards, then you are required to discard one of your stacks completely and then start a new stack there with that card. Each player is going to get 4 turns each round where they're drawing 2 cards, which means that you are able to place 8 cards each and every round, and then you're going to be going into a scoring phase. And then the game plays over 6 rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of that round is going to be the winner of the game. One other thing to note about this game is that it is also a prequel to their upcoming and bigger game, Robo Rescue, so if you do want to learn more about that, I'm sure they will have more info on their campaign and through their updates. But if you do like free games, and if this one looked interesting to you, or if you just want to go ahead and support the creators and the awesome campaign that they're running here, go ahead and grab yourself a box and maybe another 3 and show them some support. And launching on May 20th, we have Cat Spotting, which is a party game where players are racing to spot a cat first in a bunch of hand-painted crowds of cats. And this does say that it plays 2 players here, and that is definitely not true. It definitely plays way more than that. In fact, I don't know if there's a limit to the number of players that this can play, but this game offers hundreds of hand-drawn cats, both on these cat crowd cards as well as the cat deck itself. At the core of this game, you're just going to be revealing a cat card and then trying to be the first to spot it in the crowd, but the campaign also states that this is a series of micro games about searching and finding cats in a crowd, so I do think there's going to be a few variants and different ways that you can play this game. But if you like cats and you like games that you can teach really quickly to your friends and family of any age group, this is definitely one that you'll want to check out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. And also launching on May 20th, we have another party game, but rather than this one being about cats, this one is actually about trying to get your dancing babies into nightclubs. This one's a dexterity party game where at the beginning of the game, you're going to have a bunch of different nightclub cards out on the table, and players are going to be competing to try and get their babies onto those nightclubs first. Each player has 3 baby miniatures that they're going to be using throughout the game, and the way that you get those babies out onto those nightclub cards is by drawing a challenge card on your turn. This challenge card is going to dictate some sort of way that you can either toss, flick, or drop your baby into those cards, and if you are successful, then that's going to get you one step closer to winning the game. At the end of your turn, you're also going to be drawing a nightclub card and then adding it to the existing cards in any orientation or position that you like. The game continues like this until one of the players is able to get all 3 of their babies out into the nightclubs, and then they are the winner of the game. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And this next one is also launching on the 20th, and this one is called Sauros, and this one is a game that I think looks like a lot of fun, because this one is a trick-taking game that also incorporates tile placement, and it also features these really nice tiles. The way this game works is that you're going to be putting all these tiles into the center of the table face down, and then each player is just going to be randomly drawing 7 of those in order to create their hand. And then the players are going to be playing through a number of rounds equal to the number of players, trying to win a number of tricks in order to actually gain these tiles and then place them onto their own personal player board in order to score victory points depending on those placements. After all the players have taken their 7 tiles, you're still going to have a bunch of tiles remaining in the middle of the table, and each trick starts within the round by revealing one of those remaining tiles. The suit of this tile determines trump for the current trick, and for the most part this game does follow normal trick-taking rules where the lead player is going to be setting the lead suit based on whatever they decide to play, and then all the other players do have to follow that suit if they are able to, and it's the player that plays the highest value that wins that trick. Unless you're not able to, then you can play whatever you want, and if you play trump, then it is the player who has the highest trump value within that trick that's going to win. That being said, there are still a few special tiles in this game that do operate a little bit differently. For example, you do have the 0 tiles here, which for the most part are just a value of 0, except for the case where there is a 9 in the trick. If there's ever a 9 in the trick, then the 0 beats the 9. This is important to know because the 9 is the highest value that you can get on any of these tiles. There's also the T-Rex tile, which actually beats everything, and it also doesn't have a suit, making it wild, meaning that you can just play it anytime that you want. But the catch with this one is that it doesn't have an icon, and this is important when it comes to scoring victory points at the end of the game, because like I said, whenever a trick has ended, you're going to be adding tiles onto your own personal player sheet. You're always going to be doing this whether or not you win the trick, but if you are the winner, you actually get to put your own tile on, as well as any other tile out on the table. This means that you could take the one that was revealed as trump, or you could actually take any of the other players' tiles, but if you do that, they do need to replace theirs with the one that was revealed for trump. And after the winner has chosen their second tile, then all the players just take the tile that's in front of them, and then everyone adds those tiles onto their own personal player sheet. Each of the icons are going to be scoring differently depending on what you place beside them, and each of the sheets do also feature a different pattern, creating different opportunities for scoring depending on which sheet you get. Once a round ends, you're going to be scoring your sheet and then removing all of the tiles and putting them back in the center of the table, and then all the players pass their sheet to the player next to them. This means that every player will have the opportunity to score tiles on each of the other player's sheets, and then once your sheet comes back to you, that's going to be triggering the end of the game, and then the player with the most points overall is going to be the winner of the game. And if you do think this one looks like a lot of fun like I do, definitely feel free to check it out in the description down below and click that notify me button in order to get notified once this one launches. And also launching on May 20th, we have Final Titan, and this one is a competitive fighting game where players are going to be managing a team of 4 fighters. The fighting in this game is very simple, but the game is not so much about the fighting, but more about managing your team and putting out the right fighters at the right time in order to take advantage of your opponent's weaknesses. This is also a game that I thought was launching a couple weeks ago, and I do have a little bit of playthrough footage here, so I will just go ahead and roll that for you now. but if you are interested in this one, I will still have it linked in the description down below. And it's a game that's super easy to teach and play, and anytime that you play this, I guarantee you will want a rematch, and you'll be playing this multiple times throughout the night. What's also really interesting about this game is that on its surface, it has some mechanisms that normally I am not super fond of, like player elimination, as well as randomness through rolling a die to determine your success or failure. But the game plays quick enough that if you are eliminated, it's not that far from the end of the game. And also the game plays in such a way that you will be rooting for one of the other players because you'll want them to enact your revenge. And although it might seem like you're just rolling a die to determine your attack, and that might be true, but there's just so much more nuance and decision going on with everything else involved in the battle. You're going to feel like more of a manager of a team, creating your lineup of fighters and sending them out at the right time depending on their opponent and which of your fighters you think will best nullify your opponent's strengths or exploit their weaknesses. Players can also get different tokens and cards that can grant them with some special effects or abilities, and this is all going to come into play with your decision making and how that combines with your characters and how your various characters combo together. But like I said, the publisher was kind enough to send me a prototype copy of the game, so I think the best way to show this game off is to just show you how the game actually plays. And the reason this game is called Final Titan is because this is a King of the Hill style game where there's always going to be one character in the game acting as the current Titan. Once a player's character becomes the Titan, it normally stays there until it is defeated by another character, and then that character would be taking its place. As I mentioned, there are a ton of different characters offered in this game, and they all have different abilities and effects, and pretty much every rule in this game can be broken in one way or another. But before we get too far into the gameplay here, I just want to mention that I currently have this set up for 3 different players, and you normally would each have 4 different characters in your roster, but because of my limited player space here, I'm just going to show off 3 because I think that is more than enough to show you how this game plays. And I just randomly dealt these characters out, which is a way that you can play the game, but you can also do an open drafting as well. Drafting the characters does make it more competitive, but I personally prefer just the random draw because it is quicker to set up, and because this game does introduce the randomness of the dice roll. It's always fun to hope for the upset and see the underdog win. That being said, I haven't played a game yet where I felt like one player was way more overpowered than the rest. There's definitely individual cards that seem really overpowered when they first make their way into the combat area, but what you'll soon find out is that a lot of these characters seem overpowered in their own individual ways, and that is just one of the things I love about this game. These are my 3 characters here, and each of them do have some different stats and effects. Characters can have different abilities that get triggered at different points in the game. For example, this one grants me with a dodge token at the start of each fight. Each of the characters can also have an ultimate, which can trigger some powerful instant effects, or even an ultimate form, which can also trigger instant effects, but this one persists, usually giving you some sort of special ability as long as you are in that form. The different values down here represent the amount of damage you do depending on the value you roll on the die. Each of these could also have an icon associated with it, which can allow you to do things like steal health from your opponent or grant you with an additional action. Some of the other characters can actually feature a bench power, which is in effect as long as they are not the current one in battle and as long as they're still alive. And these can cause all sorts of different effects, which could affect all players or maybe just affect your character that's currently in battle, or it might just grant you with some sort of bonus as long as you keep that character on your bench. In addition to your characters, each player is also dealt 3 different upgrade cards at the beginning of the game, and they can grant you with all sorts of different effects. And players will be simultaneously revealing these at the start of each battle, and if you are able to survive battles, or if you have the right abilities, you can get more of these into your possession. And I think we're good to get into some fights now. And the way that this game starts is that each of the players are going to be looking at each of their character's speed, and whichever player has the character with the highest speed is going to be the player that goes first. Both myself and my player on the left here have a character with the speed of 10, which is the highest value. So in that case, we would be tied. So we would just look at our next fastest character, and theirs is a 9 and mine is an 8, which means that they would start as the Titan. They can choose whichever character they want to start out as the Titan, and this is a big part of the strategy in the game. They don't have to use the one that is the quickest. But before we do jump into the first battle, there's a couple things we have to do. First of all, whichever player begins the game as the starting player does get an additional upgrade card, and also all the players will want to look at the abilities of their characters and see if they have any start of game effects. This character does, and their ability grants their player with 2 dodge tokens, which are really nice because you can spend them anytime that one of your characters is going to take damage to instead take no damage. But I think the character they're going to put into play first is going to be the Gunslinger, and the reason for that is because they have a really nice ability of Quick Draw, which allows them to deal 3 damage at the start of a fight, and they do have quite a bit of health. And this player does also have this bench power, which deals 2 damage anytime that a charge is rolled, which is a special icon on the die. And also, since that player has those 2 dodge tokens, they think that they can keep this character in through multiple fights, allowing them to take advantage of their quick draw multiple times. Since this player is going first, we go clockwise to see who their opponent is, and it would be this player here, but they're looking at the whole situation over here and feeling very intimidated because this player has a lot going on, and you do have the option to be a coward in this game and pass the battle on to the next player, hopefully, which this player would really like to do. The only way you can do this is if you have some of these upgrade cards in your possession, which we all do have at the beginning of the game, but you're going to be picking one of those, probably the one that you feel is the least useful to you, and then you're going to be putting that into a pool in the center. Let's say they chose to do that, so they get to keep their other 2 for now, but they are giving this one up in order to pass the battle on to me. But I have some of these as well, and if I also really don't want to jump into this battle right now, or if I have a card here that I don't think is particularly useful to me, I could add that card to this pool to pass the battle on to the next player, which would just go back to this player over here. The catch here is that the more cards that get added into this pool, the more valuable that pool becomes, and whichever player does decide to take on the battle gets to claim these cards. This means that you sometimes might do this just to pass it on to the other player in the hopes that they also pass back to you, so that you net yourself an additional card. But I ain't no coward and I'm ready for a fight, so I'll take this card and I'm going to choose one of my characters to go up against this Titan. If they roll a fist, they're going to be doing 4 points of damage, so that's pretty scary. If they roll the claw, then they're going to be doing 2 points of damage and also getting an additional roll, so that's also scary. And because of the bench power over here, if they happen to roll the charge icon, that also is going to do 2 damage to me. I haven't explained the way that the charge works, but this is essentially the way that you activate your ultimate or your ultimate form. And the first time that you roll your charge, you're going to be flipping your charge token over to its other side. And if you roll the charge a second time when this is already flipped up, then that's going to be instantly activating the effect of your ultimate. Or if you have an ultimate form, instead it's going to be granting you this ultimate form token, which indicates that you are now in your ultimate form. Whenever there's a battle, there's always going to be one Titan, and there's always going to be one challenger. Unfortunately for me, I don't have any bench powers that I can take advantage of, but this character does counter the claws, so that's pretty nice, and they do also gain a dodge token at the start of the battle, and they do have a couple nice bonuses down here where if I roll the karate chop, I also get to roll the die again, and if I roll the fist, I also get to perform the siphon action, which heals me equal to the amount of damage I've done. Their ultimate is pretty sweet as well because it's going to deal 4 fists, which could actually deal up to 8 damage and then heal me that amount as well. But because we know that they have some dodge tokens, they're probably going to dodge that, so I don't know if I will be able to land that, but I think we're going to try our luck with this character and see how we do. And the first thing that the players do when they start a fight is choose their upgrade cards, and because my speed is higher than my opponent's, I get to choose mine first, but these are going to be going face down, but I am going to be using 3 of them. And then they're going to be choosing their upgrade cards. And they're going to be playing these 2 cards, but we can just go ahead and reveal everything now. And I played the Shadow Step, which will get me a dodge token. I played the Gorgon's Gaze, which prevents my opponent from ever re-rolling the die more than once on their turn. And the reason I did that is because they do have this special ability when they roll the Claw that allows them to roll the die again, so this would prevent that from happening. And finally, I have the Inner Focus, which allows me to set my first roll as a charge, which will get me 1 step closer to my ultimate. My opponent played the Hex, which allows them to discard one of my upgrade cards, which isn't great for me. And then they also played the Bag of Tricks, which allows them to return one of their other upgrade cards back to their hand because normally these would get discarded. So I think they don't want me to get a dodge token, so they're going to be sending that one to the discard pile. And then because they have the Bag of Tricks, they get to get that hex back to their hand, but the Bag of Tricks does also get discarded. For the other two, I like to just slide them under the character card so we remember that we have those effects for this battle. And because I do have the higher speed, I do get to attack first, but before we do that, we need to resolve any start of fight effects. And my character does have one, which allows me to gain a dodge token, so that's pretty nice. And my opponent has their quick draw as well, which is going to allow them to inflict 3 damage immediately. And that's not great for me because I only have 5 health, but we do have the dodge token if things get hairy. And because I played the card that allows me to set my first roll as a charge, I am going to do that. So let's throw this with the charge side up. And the nice thing about that is anytime you flip this up to its charge side, that also does grant you with an additional roll. So let's see what we can do here. And we've activated our ultimate immediately here, which would normally do a ton of damage, but of course our opponent does have these dodge tokens and they are not going to allow that to happen, so they are going to dodge. And now this flips back to its other side, and our opponent is going to be rolling their die. And they have rolled the devil horns, and I can't take that damage, so I'm also going to be using my dodge token. Now it comes back to us. Let's see what we can respond with. Another charge. So we get to roll again. Let's see if we can actually do some damage here. Karate chop for 1 damage. And it's not terrible because that also does grant us another roll. And we have gotten the karate chop again, so we're going to be dealing another damage, and that grants us with another roll. And I will take it. Let's roll this again. And yes, there is a side that rolls blank, but we did do 3 damage, so that's not terrible. And let's see what our opponent responds with. And they got the claw, which is actually really good for us. So it does 2 damage, but we actually have a small detail here on our character that says that we counter the claw. And because we counter it means that it's going to be doing no damage to us instead. And even though this has a tiny little die here that says they get to re-roll when they roll the claw, because we played this card that says they can only roll the die once on their turn, they do not get to roll that again. So this means that we are still alive here. And we have rolled the fist, and it's only 2 damage, and our opponent has 7 health left, so it's not a huge threat to them, but they know if they allow me to do that damage, then I'm going to be healing too, because this does have the life drain associated with it. So for that reason, they will use their last dodge token to avoid that attack. So this is going to be going back to our opponent, and let's see what they do. And this is actually good for us because this does grant them a charge. And like I said, when you flip this over to its charge side, that does grant you with another roll. But it's the same thing here as the last turn. Because we played this card that only allows our opponent to roll once on their turn no matter what, they do not get that additional roll. But I think we're still dead here because they do have that benched character with the bench power that allows them to do 2 damage anytime that they roll a charge. This character gets discarded, but everything else pretty much remains the same. This character keeps any of their tokens, and their current health does persist into the next battle. But the one catch here is that their charge does get reset, so they will be losing that. And they will be going into the next battle because they have successfully defended their place as the Titan. And the next player to fight would be the player to the left of me, but because that's currently the Titan, you just skip over to the next player, which brings us back to the 3rd player over here. And now they get to decide once again if they want to enter the battle and fight this Titan now that I've damaged him and got rid of all of his dodge tokens. Or they could choose to be a coward once again because they still do have 2 of these upgrade cards that they could use to pass the battle on to me. But I think they will fight this time because they have this character that has 10 health and also can deal a nice amount of damage. And also they have a special ability here that allows them to play 2 cards from the top of the upgrade card deck instead of using theirs, which is nice because it's just going to essentially grant them with 2 free cards. This character still does have the higher speed, so they would play their cards first. but you do also have the option not to play any cards, and I think they will save those for a future battle. But for the War Golem here, they just draw 2 from the top of the deck. You don't have a choice, so they are going to do that, and we can just go ahead and reveal those. And these cards actually aren't too bad for them because this one's going to gain them +5 speed, which will allow them to be the first attacker in this battle, which wouldn't have been the case otherwise since they do have the lower speed. And also they have this Sharpshooter card, which allows them to re-roll the die anytime that they do roll a miss, because yes, there is a blank side on these dice. Let's just slide them under here so we remember that we have those effects. And they're going to be rolling the first die, so let's see how they do. Not bad, they get a charge and they get to re-roll. And we instantly got our ultimate, which actually doesn't help us too much with this current battle, but it will help us in a future battle because it allows us to give an action token to one of our fellow characters out on the bench. And the Mind Bug here is pretty sweet because it can allow you to steal opponents' characters if you do activate their ultimate. So I think an extra action on the Mind Bug could be pretty powerful, so we will go ahead and do that. That's going to be resetting our charge, and it's going to be the other player's turn. And one thing I want to do before I forget is that they do have the start of fight effect to deal 3 damage. So let's make sure we add a token for that, but now it's going to be their turn to roll the die. And they have rolled the Karate Chop, which only does 1 damage, and now it is back to us. Lots of Karate Chops this game, and that's also only going to do 1 damage. 3 more damage on the War Golem, and now we get to roll again, and I rolled a blank, but lucky for us, when we roll a miss, we get to re-roll the die. And that's nice for us because we do 4 damage, and they don't have any dodge tokens left, so they are getting pretty close to death here. Now it's their turn, and they have rolled the Claw, which does 2 damage, and also allows them to roll again. And they have rolled the Karate Chop, which is 1 damage on us. And I think we can wipe them out here with another fist. And when you defeat the Titan, you just flip your token over because you have now become the new Titan. They get eliminated and permanently removed from the game. The surviving player does lose their upgrade cards. One thing I forgot to mention on the last battle is that the winning player does also gain an additional upgrade card. And I think we'll do one more battle here since it does come back to me. And I think I will throw the Hydra into the mix here. So my Hydra is able to counter fists, which is really nice because their fist is really powerful. And when I do counter it, I do get to gain an action token, which is really nice because I can spend those to perform additional rolls on my turn. I have 10 health, but only 3 speed, but I think we're going to be okay here because they only have 2 health left, so we are definitely going to wipe them out. But at the beginning of our battles, we do need to play our upgrade cards. And for the War Golem, it's the same as last time. They're not actually allowed to play the upgrade cards from their hand. They just have to draw randomly from the top of the deck, which is nice because it still does get them free cards, even if they don't get to pick what they are. But my last card isn't very good for me right now, so I'm just going to hang on to that. So let's reveal what our opponent has. And they got Sharpshooter again, which allows them to re-roll the die if they miss. And an Armor, which is going to reduce the damage by 1 for every attack I'm able to inflict on them. But they are the faster one here, so they get to go first. So let's see how they do. And they have activated their charge, and they get to re-roll. And a Karate Chop, so nothing too crazy. And let's see what we got. And a Fist, which is going to do 4 damage minus the 1 for the Armor, which is going to be 3, which is still enough to wipe them off this world. So this character is eliminated, and we can send them back to the graveyard. My character becomes the new Titan, and then the next player becomes the Challenger. But I think that's enough to show you how the game plays. The rounds just continue like this with someone challenging the Titan and then players using their upgrade cards to prepare for the battle. And whenever you're a challenger, you're always going to want to send in the character that you think can exploit your opponent's weaknesses the best. There are some other tokens that you didn't get to see through this little playthrough here, and that's the Poison token, which is going to inflict 1 damage every time it is that player's turn. Then there's the Power token, which is going to add an additional damage to each of your attacks. Just playing against myself here is only a small taste of what this game has to offer, because I think so much more is introduced when you do have the different dynamics of other players at the table. Even when it's not your turn, you're always going to be rooting for one player or another, whether it's because the other player humiliated you in a previous battle, or because you know one of those characters currently in the battle is particularly strong against your set of characters and you'd really like to see them wiped out. There's a lot more to the decision making once you have 4 different fighters to choose from, whereas I was just showing you 3 here. And those decisions of when to use your action tokens or your upgrade cards, or maybe just pushing your luck with what you have, can all be very pivotal and game changing if you have a decent strategy and a little bit of luck on your side. And if you survive long enough to be the last player standing, then that means you have won the game, and I definitely recommend checking this one out and giving it a play if you do have the opportunity. I've had a lot of fun with this one, and I'm hoping to play it again this weekend. Check it out if you're interested, and I will have a link in the description down below. And also launching on May 20th, we have Rolling Seas, and this one is a roll and write where each player is going to have their own sea map as well as a ledger in order to track their journey. And players are going to be trying to have different experiences out on sea and then make their way back to port where they can tell their story in order to earn victory points. The way the game plays is over a series of rounds, where at the start of each round, an adventure card is going to be drawn and resolved. And this could just reveal clear seas and have no effect at all, but oftentimes it may require players to draw storms, pirates, sea monsters, or other hazards out on their map sheet. After that, 4 dice are going to be rolled. You have your 3 direction dice, which get put on the compass, and then you have an exploration die, which is going to be put on the exploration track. Players will then each be able to choose an action to perform. You can either explore if you're adjacent to land, and this is going to allow you to gain the resources depicted on that exploration track depending on what was rolled, or you could choose to sail, and this is going to allow you to move up to the movement points based on your ship, but you're also going to be choosing one of the direction dice when you do this, and that's going to be determining the wind direction, and that's going to influence the amount of movement points that you need to spend depending on which direction you want to sail. Players can also collect different provisions throughout the game, and you can also spend those to move even further on your turn, or even to help you get through the various hazards that you might have to sail through. As I mentioned, this is a game where you're trying to tell a story, so running into these hazards is not always a bad thing. Even though they might be costly, they do gain you story points that you'll be able to trade in for victory points whenever you do visit a port. And that is the final action that you can perform on your turn. You can choose to visit a port where you're going to be telling your story, and you can also spend gold in order to upgrade your ship in a variety of ways, and you'll also be able to resupply your provisions up to your ship's capacity. If this one looks interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked down below. And also on the 20th, we have a campaign that's going to be offering 2 different games. We have Card Game Traders, and then we have a bigger box game called Chartres. I don't have too much info on these ones, but I do know that Chartres is a competitive game where players are going to be playing over 3 rounds to try and gain the most influence in the city. And on a turn, players are going to be playing 2 cards, with one of them activating a previously played card. I don't really have much more info than that, but it does sound interesting. But the different actions you can perform is to acquire horses and carriages to help you move material around, gather those materials in order to do things like make wine, expand the city, and decorate the cathedral with stained glass windows. Card Game Traders is also a game that I don't have a ton of info on, but I do know that this is also a competitive game, but in this one, players are competing to try and build the most valuable collection of trading cards. Players are going to be buying and selling from a changing market that they will be able to influence, and on a turn, players will be able to play one of their cards in order to activate its special abilities, in order to manipulate the market or their cards or their opponents, or have a whole variety of effects that will hopefully help you build your collection into the biggest and most valuable amongst your peers. Like I said, unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of info on these ones, but I'm sure there'll be a ton more info when this one actually launches, so if you do want to check it out, I will have it linked down below. And also launching on the 20th, we have another game that unfortunately I just don't have any info on, but this one is called Space Station, and this one's a cooperative survival game in space. And in this game, players are going to be playing as unique characters with unique stats and abilities, and your space station is falling apart, and it's up to the players to discover a way to get home to safety. This one does require an app in order to play, which you can just go ahead and download for free, and it's going to be presenting the different options to the players as they take their actions, and it's going to be guiding them through the setup and the gameplay, and it's also going to be providing the narrative as you play throughout the game. Like I said, I just don't have much more info on this one other than what's on the campaign page, but if you do want to learn more about it, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. And launching on May 21st, we have Micro Pirates, and this one's a competitive game where each player is going to be choosing an upgradable, unique pirate and then combining it with one of the ships. The goal here is to be the first to reach a certain amount of reputation, but what's really neat about this game is that there is a concept of moral alignment, and depending on where you land on that throughout the game, it's going to determine how much reputation you need to actually win. The main board's set up with a bunch of randomized tiles that you're just going to be putting out on the table that are going to be featuring different ports, resources, and islands that players can visit. And on a turn, you have a few actions that you can choose from. You can either sail to move up to your ship's movement points, or if you're located currently on a fish icon or a plantain icon, then you can choose to forage, and that'll allow you to roll dice in order to forage food from either the sea or the land. Players can visit the ports in order to gain quest cards, which will require them to either deliver resources, defeat other ships, or make other accomplishments in order to gain the benefits or victory points of those cards. If you're next to an island that also has an unexplored jungle on it, you can perform the explore action. And whenever you do that, you're going to be rolling a number of dice with the goal of trying to roll at least 6 binocular icons. If you do that, then you have successfully explored the island and you're going to be earning a treasure map card. But one thing to note about this action is that you don't have to roll all those binoculars in a single action. If you choose to stay at that island, you can actually perform that action again, adding your new results to your previous ones. This only works if you do stay at the island, so if you do decide to leave, then you will be forfeiting those dice. But if you are successful enough to get at least 2 of these map cards, then you might be able to find yourself some treasure, because in order to find treasure in this game, you need to get 2 map cards that have overlapping icons. Whenever you're able to do that, then that's going to be telling you where the treasure is located, and then you can go there and perform an explore action in order to claim that treasure. Treasure can be traded in to get gold or fame, and there are actions that allow you to spend gold and resources in order to do things like hire crew or buy upgrades for your ship. And of course, you can take an action to attack NPC or player ships. And whenever you're doing that, you're going to be rolling dice and then adding bonuses from any crew or upgrades that you might have. And some of those bonuses might require you to spend resources in order to add even more attack power or defense. And if you win, you might gain some fame, gold, or resources. But if you lose, you will be taking damage. And if you take too much damage, you're going to be losing some of your gear and then being reset back to one of the ports. The game continues like this until one of the players reaches the amount of fame that they need in order to win the game, and then they are the winner. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. And launching on May 22nd, we have a new edition of the game Trismegistus, and I really wish that they did put an image on the BGG page here because this new edition does look really, really nice. But if you're not familiar with the original game, this is a Euro game where players are playing as researchers, conducting fringe experiments to transmute metals into other metals. Players are going to be gaining raw materials, building up their library to make their actions more efficient, gaining mastery in the different elements of earth, air, water, and fire, and you're going to be trading in those materials in order to complete various experiments, which will gain you with all sorts of different bonuses and additional actions that will allow you to publish your findings and score more victory points at the end of the game. And I should also mention that this one is also my own personal pick of the week. I haven't heard of this one before, but now that I've looked into it, I do think that it does look like a lot of fun. And I'm glad that it is getting a deluxe edition because I think it definitely does deserve it. But like I said, this one is a Euro game, and on its surface, it does share a lot of familiar mechanisms that I'm sure you've seen from a ton of other games, such as dice drafting, action points, or resource conversion. But it's really the way that this game implements those mechanisms that I think sets it apart, because this game does do all of those things, but very differently. What I'm showing you here are the different shared boards that players are going to be drafting their dice from, and the dice drafting does start very familiar, where at the beginning of each round a bunch of dice are going to be rolled, and then depending on the icon that they show, they're going to be grouped together on the associated boards that also share those icons. Each of the boards are going to be associated with a different raw metal indicated by their color, as well as a different organic compound that is indicated at the top of the board. But after all the dice are rolled and assigned to their appropriate boards, just like with any dice drafting, players are then going to be taking turns drafting one of these dice into their possession in order to take actions with that die. But this is where things get very different. In most other games, the die you draft determines the action you get access to, as well as the power of that action depending on the value of the die. But in this game, there is no real value of the die. There's just the icons of the different types of metals. And also, you always have access to the same actions no matter which die you decide to draft. So what does drafting these dice actually do? To explain all this, I'm not going to be using the exact terminology that the game uses. I'm just going to be using words that I think best explain the way that this works, because when you do draft a die, you're going to be looking at the number of dice in that pool, and whatever value that is, you're going to be earning that number of charges for that die. For example, if I drafted a die from the leftmost board that has 3 dice on it, then that means that the die that I draft is going to have 3 charges associated with it. In order to track this, you're going to be using your own personal player board, and there's a track at the top of your board that you're going to be putting that die on, and in this example, you would be putting it on the value of 3. The other 2 dice on this board you can mostly ignore for now, or just pretend they're not there, because that's where dice go once they've been completely spent of their charges, so the 2 here are just dice from a previous turn. But now that you do have a die with unspent charges, you're going to be continuing to use that die and not drafting another one until that die's charges have been completely spent. But whenever you do have a die that still has charges on it, you're just going to be taking one action on your turn, and you do have a few different actions to choose from. Your first action is to spend a charge on your die in order to gain a new experiment card, and these are essentially objective cards that will gain you bonuses and victory points. And each of these are going to depict a certain amount of materials that you need to discard in order to complete that card, and if you are able to do so, it is a free action to perform. What's really nice about completing these, aside from the bonuses that the card itself grants you, is that every time you do complete an experiment card, you do also get a token that you can place out onto these victory point multipliers to expand your victory points at the end of the game. And also, each of these experiment cards come in one of 4 different types, and every time you complete one of the types for the first time, that will allow you to move one of your books from the left of your bookcase into the bookcase itself, which will grant you different bonuses for completing rows and columns, and also just straight up victory points at the end of the game, depending on how many of those books you're able to move over. The second action you can perform is to spend 3 charges on your die in order to gain an artifact. Artifacts are slotted into the bottom of your board, and each of them can grant you with different bonuses that you'll be exhausting in order to activate. Each of the artifacts also comes with one of those tokens that you'll be able to put on the victory point multipliers like we saw with the experiment cards. And one thing to note about both the experiment cards and the artifacts is that they are all out on display on the shared boards, and you only have access to the one at the location where you drafted your die. The third option you have as an action is a very simple one, because for this one you can spend any amount of charges from your die in order to gain that amount of the associated raw metal. The fourth option is very similar to this, where you can spend as many charges as you like, but rather than taking the associated metal, you're going to be taking the associated organic compound. And the final action you can choose to perform is where all the fun happens, because this is where you get to transmute your metals into other metals. Anytime that you gain a raw metal, it's going to be going into its associated bin at the bottom of your board, and then when you choose to transmute it, not only does it change into a different metal, but it's also going to be going to the top of your board into the refined section. I did say that you could do this as many times as you want, as long as you're able to pay the cost, but there is one more requirement here, and for this you're going to be looking at the color of the die that you drafted, because you're only going to be able to transmute metals that follow a path that match the color of your die. And I did say that it costs 1 charge as well as 1 organic compound, so you can use any of the different compounds in order to do this action, but you might have noticed that there's tracks on each of these individual boards, and depending on which compound you decide to spend in order to perform that action, it's going to be moving your token up the mastery track on that associated board. Moving up these tracks can gain you with different bonuses, but one of the main reasons you want to do this is because a lot of the different experiment cards that you're going to be trying to complete will require that you have a certain mastery of a certain level. And those are all the main actions you can perform on your turn, but as you're playing the game, you can also gain a few different types of tokens that can allow you to modify your die in a variety of ways, such as increasing the number of charges that you have, or modifying the color or symbol on your die temporarily. Players will also each have this battery token that you can see on the left of the board here, and this gets recharged at the beginning of each round, and you can spend that at any point in order to recharge one of your exhausted artifacts in order to use that artifact again in the future. Or if you don't want to use it for that, you can use it to perform some bonus transmutations. You might have also noticed that there's a couple metals on the right here, and these are the most costly and difficult to acquire, and that makes sense because these are silver and gold does have a special ability in this game because it does act as a wild metal, and also you can spend golds to gain more of those books to add into your library. But the round is going to continue like this, with players spending the charges of their die to perform those various actions, and then drafting a new die when those charges run out until they've completely depleted 3 different die, and then that's going to be triggering the end of the round. And then after 3 rounds, you're going to be triggering the end of the game, and then the player with the most victory points at that point wins the game. I think this one looks really, really solid and unlike any other game I've ever seen, and I do also want to mention that they are offering a new roll and write version of this game as well. I wasn't able to find any info on this one, so if you do want to have a look at it, you'll have to check out the campaign yourself, but I will have that linked down below, and of course you can follow along to get notified once this one launches. And those are all the campaigns I have for you this week, but I am happy to say that the Leafs were somehow able to pull it together after 3 losses in a row and finally beat the Panthers in a game here. That ties the series at 3-3. Sorry Florida, but whoever wins the next one is going to be moving up in the bracket with the Hurricanes already waiting for them. Now we just need a couple miracles for the Jets here, otherwise the Oilers are my new favorite team. And it's at this point in the video where we normally would be offering all sorts of board game pledge giveaways, and we do have a lot more in the queue and we do have a lot more to come, but I am going to be skipping that just for this 1 week here to give me a little bit of breathing room to get caught up on all the previous giveaways. I've just been too busy with renovations and work and keeping up with these videos, and I just haven't been able to give enough attention to the previous winners and reach out to the publishers. And I think I've got about 400 emails to catch up on, so if you have reached out to me and you haven't heard from me yet, I do apologize, but I will try to get through all those this weekend one way or another. I don't like falling behind this much, so I'm just going to be taking this weekend to do a full reset, and then we'll get back into the swing of things right away in the next video. So I guess that's it for now, but I do appreciate you tuning in and checking out the video, and I hope there's something there that caught your interest. Enjoy your weekend, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.